Hey, everybody, I'm Mike Cavaliere. I'm going to be talking to you about a recent experience I had developing a software as a service application using the Jamstack as just an individual developer. So overall, I'm going to first talk about motivation, like why I went down this path. I'll give you a little insight into the app itself that I've been building. I'll tell you about the individual libraries and tools that I worked with and why. And then I'll go into sort of the lessons that I learned from this, what I love about the stack, a couple of challenges that you might run into if you decide to do something similar. So a little bit about me. I work for a company called EchoBinds. We're an agency that develops all types of web and mobile software. Senior engineering strategist, which just means that I've been engineering for a long time, some 20 years now. And now I'm a little more on the strategy side of what to build and what not to build. I've been working with JavaScript for pretty much my whole career. I've definitely done a couple of years worth of PHP and Rails and different capacities, but JavaScript's my heart, the thing that I love the most, especially React over the past couple of years, lots of React and React Native. And Next.js in particular has really grabbed my attention over the past year or two. It's what I reach for just about every web project nowadays. So in terms of this app that I'm going to be talking about, a couple of months ago, around October, I realized that I had been, writing software for a long time, but not teaching nearly enough. And so I've got all this knowledge and I wanted to put some more of it out there. I've been doing a lot of blog posts, but I thought that it was a good time to write some kind of a technical book. I don't get necessarily engaged in just teaching someone one particular programming language or one particular tool. I like teaching people how to make a lot of tools work together, and at the end of the day, have them ship something that's a product, that's a working application. And I like teaching all those things together. It's really enjoyable. So I wanted to do that, but I didn't want to teach how to build another to-do list app or something generic like that. There's just too much of that out there. So a software as a service application that did something valuable was what appealed the most to me. And it seemed like a really good teaching tool because in the process of doing that, you touch on a lot of different development topics. And I had a personal need at the time. My wife and I, we have two really cute kids, Leo and Max. Leo's 2 and Max is about to turn 2 months. So we're taking photos of them all the time. And I didn't have a really simple way to share them with family members. Like Google Photos and the iOS Photos app, sending a private photo gallery isn't always as straightforward as I'd like it to be. And I just kind of wanted a way for my wife and I to collaborate on an album and just send a link to our relatives so that they've got a consolidated set of photos. And I also wanted to build it myself because I love the Jamstack, and scratching my own itch felt like an enjoyable thing to do. So the app was named JamShots. I came up with a handful of names, and I just had some members of the EchoBind team vote on them. This was the one we came up with. And it lets you upload photos. It's going to let you collaborate on a gallery pretty easily and share the photo gallery. And it's a pretty simple process. You create the gallery, name and description. You tap to upload a bunch of photos. And you click another button to share the link, and you've got a nice, pretty decent looking photo gallery. So the stack I used was based on Next.js, which includes React. React, I use pretty much anything web nowadays, and Next.js is my default framework for React to go to because it's performant. It's ready set up for SEO and speed and accessibility, and it just makes a lot of things easier, like route creation. So it's where I start all my web projects. For the database, Postgres is another solution in that way that it's the default one I reach for because as a relational database, it's been around so long, it's very established, it's performant, and it's good for just any generic purpose. Prisma, as we all know, is a great ORM solution. I like the simplicity of it and the flexibility. And to me, Prisma is very much like when I discovered Ruby on Rails Active Record, and it gave us this really great way of versioning databases by telling the ORM how you wanted the database to change on every iteration. Prisma's like that, but it takes another step further where you just tell it how you want the schema to look, and it does the changes for you. So in addition to that, the fact that it's got very easy ways of working with the database for finding and updating and manipulating, it just makes it a really elegant ORM to use. And then SWR is a data fetching library that uses React hooks that's written by the same people that made Next.js. And it just makes fetching information into your pages really easy. NextAuth.js is a great authentication plugin. So I needed that to make it really easy for people to log in and log out of the app. And then on the design end, I'm not a designer, so I always reach for a UI toolkit, which by default is Chakra these days, because it's unobtrusive. It's very easy to work with. It uses styled components and emotion under the hood and lets you pass styles into properties. So it's very composable. And then Chakra Templates is a site that has copy and paste UI patterns using Chakra-UI. So it makes some common interface patterns really easy. Then React Hook Forms is pretty popular. React Form library that also boasts of being very performant. It has like a minimal amount of renders, and the API is really easy to use and great. For hosting, central to this app was the image API. So I picked Cloudinary. They're excellent and have a free plan, and they have a pretty good API interface. Vercel is the company that makes Next.js, and their platform is very easy to deploy to and fast. And Railway is a newcomer to the database world, which also boasts a free plan and has a lot of other great features as well. In the course of building the app, there was a lot of lessons learned, and a lot of it reinforced the stack that I chose and what's great about it. But it also opened. It also made me make note of a couple of things that are a little more challenging. That if any of you try to build an app in a similar manner with the Jamstack, specifically like Next.js and these other libs, then some things that you'll want to keep in mind as you're going to develop it. So on auth, NextAuth.js is just phenomenal. I built into this app. I've got a one-click Google, Facebook, and Google and it's Google and I think GitHub sign up right now, but that'll probably be changing. But be that as it may, NextAuth integrates with just any provider you can think of. AWS, Discord, Slack. You can click and sign in with Instagram. You can click and sign in with anything. It also lets you use databases for managing users. And in minutes, it takes nothing to set up. You just install the package. You paste a little bit of pre-made JavaScript into an API route in Next.js, and then you add your API keys for whatever provider you want, Google or whatever. All of a sudden, you've got a very easy to use one-click sign up for one-click sign up and authentication. It's also fully customizable. So if you want to change the screens that are displayed when you prompt the user to log in, you can customize the visuals of that whole flow. You can also customize the behavior. So if you wanted, for example, to track authentication, depending on provider, you can send off a custom event anytime that happens. I've got a series of 3 blog articles on NextAuth, just so you can see a couple of the different things that you can do and how to do them and just how easy they are. So check that out if you're interested in learning more about NextAuth. I highly recommend it. UI was really easy and enjoyable with the stack. Since I discovered Chakra templates, it made designing easier without having any design sense, which I have just very little, even after 20 years. I didn't want to pull on a designer, as I typically don't want to do for an MVP, a minimum viable product, or a personal project. But I just wanted to look borderline nice. Like I want it to look not hard on the eyes. It doesn't need to be award winning or anything like that, which for a first release, it never needs to be. It needs to be functional and decent looking. And that's exactly what you kind of get. With Chakra templates, you can copy and paste a lot of common use patterns. And then from Chakra itself, you can add all the buttons and the headings and the typography and the layout. If you take a look at this, this is a couple of screenshots of the homepage that I built for the book, which is built on Next.js and Chakra and uses all of these copy and paste things from Chakra templates. So The hero unit is copy and pasted and customized from there. This little features module, this pricing module, the sign up form, and the footer, all from Chakra templates. And these two sections are built with Chakra-UI itself. And all of this took like less than a day overall. And the rest was just like tweaking some pixels to make everything spaced consistently. The photo gallery world in React could use some improvement. If you do a Google search for React and photo gallery, you'll find a lot of libraries out there, but a lot of them are out of date. The one I picked looks really good, and it has this nice staggered effect for the images. But I found some bugs with the responsiveness of it and that are kind of deal breakers. And the thing was last updated in 2019, so it's not going to be fixed anytime soon. So either I have to dig under the hood of that gallery, plug in and fix it, or what I started to do, which is create a new one with CSS Grid, which has its own set of challenges. The takeaway here is that the photo galleries could use another good open source plugin, because I don't think anybody's really done it well, at least not in the past couple of years. So async multiple file upload. I also didn't find a pre-built open source solution for that in Next.js. There's a couple of different pieces. There's the front end, there's the back end, there's the integration with Cloudinary or Imagix or whatever API you choose. So I ended up rolling a custom solution, which was really fun to build, but a good amount of effort. It's just worthy of note if you need this feature in an application that you're going to spend some time on it. I may roll this into an open source plugin myself at some point, just to make it easier on other people. In this case, Cloudinary also, I had to use a couple of different APIs to get the best performance, because when you're uploading an image to an API from the browser, you don't want to go through your own Next.js API to do the actual upload. Which means you have to sign it. So just to give you like a quick overview without going into detail here, just note that this architecture here is, significant. There's 4 pieces in the app: the front end, the back end of Next.js, or the front end and the API. There's the database, and then there's the image service. And you're going to have to make at least several API requests to do it to different places. So you just know there's a non-trivial amount of effort if you decide to implement file uploads. Hosting worked out extremely well. Vercel, Railway, and Vercel, Railway, and Cloudinary, as I mentioned, all have free plans, which is great when building an MVP, because you don't want to spend anything if you know you're not going to make any money, or if you think you might make money, but you're not sure yet until you get users and people actually paying for it. So whenever I bootstrap a project, I try and use as many free tools as possible. Railway is the only tool I know of that gives you free database hosting and lets you create a development and a preview database for free. So that's awesome, but it also integrates really well with Vercel. So Vercel is the company that makes Next.js, so their platform integrates really well with Next. But when you create a Railway application or a Railway set of databases, you click the integrations tab, as you can see in this image here, and it's just another couple of clicks to integrate it with Vercel. And it basically takes all the environment variables to connect to the database and puts them into Vercel automatically for you. So there's no copy and pasting of database strings and passwords and all that. It just does it automatically for you and keeps it up to date, which is a big hassle saver, so you can focus on coding. It is worthy of note that Railway is only in the US West location, so you have to point your Vercel app to use that for now. But they are a fast-moving team, and they're shipping new features every Friday night. So I suspect they're going to go into other regions, definitely eventually, but probably sooner than later. So notes about the image API that I had to create. When you're using an API service like Cloudinary or whatever, you're going to have references to those images in your database, and mash up the data with your database data about those images. So you do have to do a little bit of manipulation and aggregation of information from the Cloudinary API with your own database API. So it takes a little bit of work and a little bit of a paradigm for you to define. One thing that I'm going to have to do here, which I made a bullet of, is start caching some of that data offline too. Whenever I load a photo gallery, you need the width and height dimensions to pop into the Next.js image component, and also to help with rendering. And those, right now, I'm making an API called the Cloudinary each time I render that to get that metadata. Ultimately, something like that you may want to cache in a database just so you don't have to make an additional API request, because the more API requests you make to something like Cloudinary, the more likely it is you'll have to get to a paid plan when you get a little traffic, or you may get like throttled. You may have your API requests reduced. So if you can cache something offline and manage it, then it's going to be helpful. Note on Next.js's image component is that it's really helpful because it lazy loads everything automatically. And on the gallery UI, when there's a lot of photos, or any UI like that that has a lot of photos, you're going to want to lazy load them, and it just automatically does it for you, which is great. I made a note here that it could use like an animation for when the photo is loading, because right now you just see a blank spot when there's photos loading, and you wouldn't know that there's a photo there. Luckily, Next has a feature for like this in their Canary release, so that's probably going to get integrated into the core soon. So you'll be able to see some kind of loading indication for that. They're doing a lot of great work on their image component, but just every other thing. A lot of good moving velocity on the Next.js project. Create, read, update, delete with database is really easy. Next.js and Prisma work really well in this case. In Next, you just drop a couple of routes, API routes for all the different HTTP verbs, or for the database operations rather, that you want to create. So you can see here what I did for the galleries. There's a delete, there's a show, there's an update, create, and a list view. And in Prisma, basically each one of these has a single API call. And Prisma's API is really simple and straightforward. So it's usually you just pluck in an ID from the route, calling find unique, or kind of calling update. So note about Next.js API architecture is that it's straightforward and simple and really easy to work with, but it's not built in for it. It's not. It doesn't have an opinionated API structure. So the serverless functions are just pretty much they take a request and they return a response. For this project, it made it easy enough to define kind of like a REST API architecture, because all I had in the database was users. Users have photo galleries, and galleries have photos in them. So we didn't need a crazy amount of API endpoints. So there's not, and I also didn't want to overcomplicate the teaching in the book by adding in like the whole discussion of API architecture. I wanted to keep it straightforward and focused on the tools. Just note that if you've got a simple project, this works really well. If you have something more elaborate that's going to require an API that you're consuming in all different ways, you're going to want to look to something like Apollo Server and GraphQL for a more robust API. You could also consider using something like Nest.js so that you've got all the bells and whistles of like a really good microservice in there. One thing that also I noted is in creating a fair amount of API endpoints, there were a lot of common tasks that I had to develop some kind of way of reusing for. Otherwise, it's just a lot of repetitive code. So in this code sample, I'm checking the request method, which I did on every non-get API request. And then if it's not the right form, I'm throwing a 400 error. Likewise, I'm checking if people are logged in and a session exists for most of the application. And this just became a lot of like redundant code. So I found online a really nice middleware function pattern where you just essentially wrapping the Next.js API handler with another function that does something else and augments the request. So in this case, this is the with Prisma client handler. I have a globally instantiated singleton instance of Prisma. And in this wrapper, if I wrap a route with Prisma client, I'm taking the Prisma client and just attaching it to the request object so that the rest of the API route just has that available in it, and I don't have to repeat the code to instantiate it. I mean, you can see like this snippet on the left looks a lot cleaner with these middleware functions, and the snippet on the right is actually a little bit more it's doing a little bit more with less lines of code. It's got instantiating the Prisma client or retrieving it, checking that there's a session and the person's logged in, and checking the HTTP method before it moves on to the code that's specific to the endpoint. So that's it. Sum up, like Next and Prisma and the rest of the libraries that I use in here are just an awesome stack. Great for developer experience, really enjoyable to work with. The performance is built in by default, so you're usually going to get a good Lighthouse score for performance, SEO, and accessibility just right out of the box. There are a couple of use cases, like I mentioned, where I think there's some good opportunity for open source libraries, namely like multi-file upload is one, a good photo gallery plugin would be really great too. Whenever you're using a stack like this, think about how you want your API to look. Is it something that's going to be easy and simple, where you could just do kind of a REST, like a simulated REST API with the Next.js serverless functions, or do you need something more robust like Apollo Server or Nest.js or any other API architecture? And if you do decide to use the Vercel and Next.js API functions as your API, then just look for patterns for code reuse, which you'll probably need to do on the front end with a stack like this too. The middleware functions that I showed you are one pattern, but there's plenty of other opportunities for doing more, because there's with raw API endpoints like those, there's going to be some common tasks that you'll want to just simplify and dry up. And this is the book, sorry. This is the book that walks through the app in a lot of detail. There's a release right now that's 107 pages, and it goes through a lot more step-by-step process of how I iterated on the app, if you were interested in that. And basically goes through like full stack CRUD and deploying in production. And right now I'm writing the portion that has to do with all the file uploads and that. And then later on, it's going to go through a lot of more user interface patterns and the aspects of integrating with Cloudinary and manipulating data in the way I just showed you, but just in more detail. And that's it. Here's a link to my information. If you have questions on any of this, or just want to talk about the Jamstack or any of these tools, reach out to me anytime, Twitter, email me. Check out the Echoblind blog if you want some more topics, more articles on the topic and other JavaScript related things. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed the talk. Thanks for listening.
Mike, thank you for the wonderful talk.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I think that was a great example of pragmatism when building as a solo developer. And I'm sure that many of the future indie hackers who are watching this will find this extremely useful.
I hope so. I tend to like to, when I'm working on solo stuff, I tend to like to, try to not do everything perfect and use like what is the most simple, but, effective way of doing things, which is kind of like with TypeScript, for example. Like TypeScript is amazing, and I use a good amount of it, but I also know that like there's a bit of a learning curve, and you can sort of you can go overboard spending too much time creating types. So in the book and in practice, like I tend to use like a certain amount of TypeScript that's just enough to be very useful at preventing bugs from getting into the code, but not too elaborate to where it like prevents you from getting things done.
Yeah, I also really liked how you approach image uploads with Cloudinary, especially like how you avoid routing unnecessary traffic through the API. Basically, I get, from what I understood, you get a token from Cloudinary, and then you use that to upload directly to Cloudinary without having to go through the API.
Yeah, and that's the way, we've done this for clients before with, other APIs like Mux Video API, for example. And it takes a little more work to do that way sometimes, in the case of Cloudinary in particular, because you have to use a couple of different APIs to do it. There's like the Node API that you use for the metadata, and then there's the REST API that you use for the direct upload. But in the end, it's worth it. There's so many reasons to do it. Namely, like everything's going to perform better, and uploading an image or a video is already like a performance challenge, especially if you're on a mobile device. Then you add to that uploading multiple of them, and then there's the issue of you don't want to get charged more money because you're sending so much stuff through your API that it's just going to add to your bill. So yeah, certainly worth the work to do it. It just takes a little planning, and you kind of got to know, that you have to have something signed and return information, and then send it, and then return information, and then add it to the database.
Yeah, and I guess there's some of that logic orchestrating all of this is adding some overhead, but it pays off very quickly.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But I do hope to get some time to extract this into an open source library if there's enough interest, because I feel like, at least for myself, it would really save me time on future projects, because I know I'm going to have to do it again for something. So it would be great, specifically for Next.js, to have something that you can just kind of, yarn install, and you have this functionality.
And essentially, this would basically allow you to connect both to Cloudinary or some other sort of static CDN, and do the whole metadata in Prisma. That would be the high level idea there.
Yeah. And I mean, it could be extracted out more to work with, different databases and ORMs, different API providers at Cloudinary, Imagix, and so on. And then there's the UI portion. So in the presentation, I have a little video clip of the UI that I built in Chakra. That could be another component as well, because if you've got multiple file uploads, going at the same time, each has a status. There's whether it started, whether it stopped,
right,
whether it's error. And in React, that was another piece of work that I had to do, which is to build this component that has a bunch of entries that are in progress, the file names, and then the current state. And then ultimately that would potentially have a progress bar too. So that component on itself was another little bit of effort to build it.
Yeah. Well, that was great. And I'd also like to open up the Q&A to our audience. So if you haven't already, feel free to drop your questions in the Prisma Day Slack channel. And let's get right in. So what was your motivation for working with this stack and the tools within it? Were you already using all of these tools?
Good question. So some of them I was. So at EchoBind, we have a set of tools that we use for what we call our greenfield stack, which means, the applications that will build from scratch for clients. Sometimes clients will hire us to take over their existing architecture and do something else with it, either add features or migrate it to a better stack. But when we're building these from scratch, we have a toolkit that we use that is now open sourced. It's called Bison. So if you go on the EchoBind GitHub repo, you'll see the Bison app, which is a generator for apps of this sort. And so I got familiarity. I already loved Next.js and React, and I got familiarity with Chakra and Prisma and Apollo, partially from using this Bison generator that we've got. So I was familiar with a good amount of them, but I wanted to go even deeper in a lot of these. Next.js is one of my favorites. Prisma, I had a good understanding of, but I wanted to really get deeper into it. Same with Chakra-UI. Chakra-UI seemed very appealing on the surface, but I wanted to do more with it. So, I utilized some of these tools that were already in EchoBind's Bison generator, and I augmented a bit. I found NextAuth.js on my own when looking for a good one-click sign-up solution, and it just seemed phenomenal. It appealed to me immediately. So I took that in. Cloudinary was a solution that I knew about for image hosting, and I compared and contrasted Cloudinary, Imagix, and S3, and Cloudinary is just the one that I decided to pick for this because they have a free plan and they have some good image transformations. So I had familiarity with a number of pieces of stack, and I augmented based on the needs for this particular app.
Got it. And what do you think is a good starting point for folks who want to start with these technologies?
Also good question. So I think my book is a good starting point, not to hard sell, but I wrote it because it's meant to be a crash course in the stack. But people can also ask me if they're looking for a recommendation for learning a variation of this stack. You could start with Next.js. I think that's a good one. And Next.js's documentation is phenomenal, and as well as the Chakra-UI documentation. If you've got even just some basic JavaScript and React experience, you can grab those two tools and start building things right away. Same with Prisma. You guys have excellent documentation.
Thank you.
I've adapted to it really well, and that says something because I'm a slow learner. So the book is meant to be that getting started guide for this particular stack. Any of the individual tools have great documentation online, and I plan to write a lot more blog posts about using these individual tools as well.
I see. Look forward to those. Is there anything about this combination of libraries that you would change, especially after having already built out this app with it?
So it's evolving as I work on it more and more. One thing which Bison solves really well that I didn't solve myself is that it's got good code generation capabilities. Having spent a lot of time working in Ruby on Rails, I think that was very spoiled by the Rails generators, and that and the generation and the scaffolding I think is missing. Bison attempts to solve this very well with a code generator called Hygen. And if you look in the Bison repo, there's a number of code generators for components and pages and GraphQL snippets as well, where you can just run a command and it'll boilerplate a lot of this for you. I've yet to utilize this in the book or in the app for it, but I think that code generation for more complex pieces of functionality like entire database CRUD and the screens to go with it, that's something that's missing. I know that Redwood.js is doing some work in that area, which is great. I think there could be, there's a lot of room for having one solution that does all of that. So that's something I'm looking for as well.
Yeah. We had a question from Cassidy, who's also one of our speakers for today. And she asked, you mentioned in the talk that the API isn't very prescriptive. And her question is, do you wish it was?
I don't know. That's a good question. Not necessarily. I like having the ability to choose. If I want to do something that's very basic, I can do it with Next.js. And if I want to do something that's more elaborate, I could reach for Apollo Server or Nest.js. I like it that I can integrate it with many things. I do think that it's for people that are new to API design, it's good to have a bit of a guide for what direction to go. So I think that would be helpful maybe in the Next.js docs or maybe just in a number of articles.
Right. And we're going to wrap up the Q&A. I'd like to thank you once again, Mike. That was very insightful, and I really enjoyed having you on. So once again, thank you, and I hope to see you soon.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.